client. What I'm going to talk about today is the 4-part conversation recipe for salary negotiations. And this is something that I walk through with every one of my salary negotiation clients. And it really is a proven method for doing well with salary negotiations. So let's get started. It's a 4-part process here. And the first part is what I call expressing delight. Make sure that the recruiter or the person that you're negotiating with knows that you're happy to have an offer. And you can do that without saying, I'm happy to have this particular offer at this particular price, but don't make them wonder. Don't make them think, oh gosh, are they even happy to have the offer? Or do they want to work here? You can express delight by saying, wow, I'm so glad to have the offer in hand. And I'm glad that you all think it's as great of a match as I do. Just that's a great way to start it. Don't make them wonder. So the second part is asking questions. And by asking questions, this is really about clarifying things that are in your offer letter or in the information that accompanies it. So one of the things that I really want you to know is that it is crucial to spend time with your offer letter, really understand everything that's in it, understand everything that comes in the benefits booklet or the relocation policy. Just go through and spend time really understanding those things, because questions that you ask should not include anything that's easily answered by something that you already have in your hands. But things like when is the base pay salary review, or when are bonuses paid out? Those are things that can be impactful for you when you're negotiating your salary. And, again, when you think about the flow of this conversation, you're actually entering in and going deeper and deeper and deeper. So, the next part really is the meat of the negotiations, making requests. And one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is they get on the phone with a recruiter and boom, immediately go to, hey, I need 10% more with my base pay. And in reality, if you think about this as a collaborative event, you are solving a business problem because you want to make sure that the offer that comes out at the end winds up being something that works out for you and also works for the employer. So this is a business transaction. It's not, personal. It's not all about you and your value as a person. This is a business transaction. So flow into this, express delight, ask questions. Again, you're being more collaborative by starting off with the nice stuff before you start asking for things, but you're going to make requests. And one of the best ways to do this is by asking for what you want in a collaborative fashion. So you can say something like, my research shows that jobs like this are paid between X and Y in the marketplace. And based on my background and experience, I'm targeting the higher end of that range. How close can we get to that? Now, there's a lot to unpack in that request, but my research shows, yes, your recruiter or hiring manager wants to know that you are familiar with what the market is for the kind of job that you're doing. They're not going to require you to cite sources or anything, but you really want to know what the market looks like. And you can do that in a number of different ways. Glassdoor, Indeed.com puts stuff on their postings, a lot of different sources that are crowdsourced salary stuff you can find online, ask your friends, those kinds of things. So research shows that jobs like this are paid between X and Y in the market. And based on my experience, this isn't just because I want more money, it's based on my experience or my expertise or whatever it is that you bring to this job. Based on that, I'm targeting the higher end of that range. And then the last part, how close can we get to that? This is a really great trick for you to help kind of short circuit the automatic yes, no. Do you have flexibility? Yes, no. Um, can I have this? Yes, no. You're asking them, how close can we get to that? And that actually, from a neuroscience perspective, requires the brain to do a little bit more work. So how close can we get to this number? Allows their brains a little bit more processing time to consider your request. And they still may not have a lot of flexibility. They still may not be able to come up to what your number is, but chances are pretty good that this first conversation is not going to be the last conversation that you have. And all you're really trying to do here is get them to stop and consider and take the request back to the decision makers. So how close can we get to that? Then they may say something like, well, I'm not really sure, I'm going to need to check with the hiring manager. That's great. That's exactly what you want. So you're going to make your requests for things like base pay or more bonus or more vacation or something in the relocation policy. Make those requests. And I wouldn't recommend doing more than maybe 5. There are some people who like to negotiate every single aspect of the offer, but you don't really want to do that. So make your requests. And the last piece is really about ending on an up note. And what I mean by this is make sure that you are, appreciating the recruiter. Thank you so much for being willing to take this back to the hiring manager. I appreciate how much effort that you're putting into this. I'm sure that we're going to be able to wind up with a solution that works for both of us. Those are great ways to end on an up note. And the last little piece of this, ending on an up note, is really knowing when you're going to meet up again. And it's okay. In fact, it works great for some recruiters that you take the lead on this. And sometimes they're going to say, oh, well, let's get back together on Tuesday at 10. And you can say, great. But a lot of times they won't make a commitment or they won't say it or whatever. You really need to know when you're going to talk to them again, because it is absolutely agonizing to worry about what's going to happen next. So if they say, oh, well, I need to go check with the hiring manager, then you can say something like, that's great. It sounds like you're going to need some time to talk with the hiring manager. Would Wednesday be enough time for you to have that conversation? I have between 9 and 11 on Wednesday. Can I call you at 9 o'clock? And then they'll say, oh, yes, or no, I'm busy until 10:30, and then you can make the arrangements. But if you know when you're going to be talking next, it's going to help you out a ton. So that's all there is to it. Express delight, ask questions, make your requests, and end on an up note, which includes knowing when you're going to talk next. That's
Kate,
the 4-part conversation recipe.
that's so amazing, Kate. I really love the simplicity around such a very big and stressful topic. I like the way that you pose the question, allowing the person that you're asking the question to some flexibility. It doesn't have to be a yes or no. You don't have to tell me right now, right? There's room for conversation. And I think that for a lot of people, it's just about having that conversation, right? It's the willingness to have the conversation and know that the recruiter or the hiring manager is willing to at least hear you out, right? It may not be a decision made right now, but it's a conversation that we can continue to have.
Yes.
We have a couple of questions, and I encourage other people to drop your questions into the Q&A. The first question is, when you apply for a job with a listed range where their very top end is barely your low end,
Mhm.
how do you keep it positive in initial conversations where they ask you if you're comfortable with the stated salary? Is it at all okay to mention that you would be on the high end of the range at this early stage? And what if you have some requirements that don't meet, what if there's some of the requirements that you don't necessarily meet, but you bring other skill sets and other things to the job?
Yeah, well, there's a lot packed into that question. So let me address a couple of things in that. First of all, I think the idea of really showing the value that you bring is a very important part of this process, and usually happens before the salary negotiation, right? It's part of the interview process, but I think that it is happening earlier and earlier in conversations about pay, that they want to know what your salary expectations are. And PS, and by the way, that's perfectly okay and natural for people to ask you what your expectations are. It's not okay for them to ask you in Oregon or many states what your salary history is. So you don't have to say. Um, but you do need to have kind of in mind what your expectations are. And there are a couple of ways around this. So, if you know that the salary range is kind of lower than you're expecting, I think it's totally okay to say, hey, the salary range for this job is lower than I was expecting based on what I'm seeing in the marketplace. And I do have some concerns about that. But I really would love to have the opportunity to see if we'd be a good fit before we start negotiating. That's totally okay to do. If you don't have a range that you're working with, and you're not comfortable telling them what your expectations are, it's okay to turn it around to them, and most of the time this works well. But what I encourage people to do is say, hey, look, without knowing more about the job and the rest of your benefits and pay elements, it's really hard for me to give you a good solid salary range. What is the hiring range for the job? That works great. So I think those are all things that you can do. And I will tell you that sometimes they'll be willing to go above the stated range if you've got somebody who's bringing something additional, and they kind of relook at things. I just had a client a couple of weeks ago negotiate, uh, pardon me, a salary that was 10% higher than the top of the range that was stated in the posting. So, I think it depends. I mean, that's not a realistic expectation for everything when you go in, but it certainly does happen.
Excellent. Thank you. Doug wonders, first he says, great advice. Do you advise a single round of requests or an iterative process with multiple requests and movements?
That is a fantastic question, and it really depends on the level of the job. So, with my kind of VP and C-suite clients, what typically happens is that's a multiple stage negotiation, and they start with kind of the base pay, bonus, and equity piece up front. And that usually will contain things like hire on bonuses and things like that. So that happens first. And then the second piece would typically be like relocation specifics. And the third piece would be things that are in the employment agreement, and terms that are around that. Now, for most of my clients who are kind of entry level, typically tends to be one round where you make your request, they go back and then come back and say, well, this is what we can do. That's pretty typical for kind of entry through mid-level, and sometimes even a little higher. But it doesn't typically happen that, you know, you request this, they come back and say, we can do that. And then you go back and forth a bunch of times. That typically doesn't happen. Max kind of two iterations. But, again, it depends. If you're at a very senior level though, expect to have multiple rounds.
Excellent. Out of curiosity, for those people who are maybe, already employed,
Mhm.
and, due to so many factors, right? Unemployment being high, um, lots of separations with companies and layoffs, and, the work never goes away, right? The
Mhm.
work is still there. And now you are manager X and you're absorbing all of this work that your coworkers are no longer with you. And you
Mhm.
recognize that you're doing more work. Or, you're on a team and you find out that your peer is making a higher amount for whatever reason. So
Right.
you're in a situation where you're working and you find that you're asking for a raise. Do you feel like the process is similar? Should someone kind of go about this process in the same way using the recipe? Or what are your thoughts?
So the recipe works great internally if you are looking at like a promotion or another job in another group. It doesn't work so well if you're looking to maximize your pay in your current role. So if you're trying to maximize your pay in your current role, what I do recommend to people is to really start with your own value. What is it that you're bringing? And again, we talked about that, how important that is in the interview process when you're initially interviewing with a company for a job. But it's also important to help highlight that for your manager as well, because, again, your manager's typically not in a position that they can say, yes, you can have that money. They're going to have to actually justify that extra expense to their leadership as well. So start with your value. I also recommend that you don't use the word fair. And that seems really weird to people because, oh, I'm making, 10% more than this person who sits beside me. That is not fair. And objectively, that may be true. But what I've discovered is the word fair tends to be a little bit of a trigger for managers because when you say, hey, my pay isn't fair, what they can hear out of that is, oh, you as a manager are not acting in integrity. And that is
Mm,
not the position that you want them to be recommending a pay increase for you from, right? You really, they're in a position that you're going to be selling them, they're going to be selling their manager. And if you put them on the defensive from the get-go, that's really not in your best interest, even if it may be true, right? Objectively true. So if you can really focus on your value and the comparison that your salary is to the external marketplace, that's going to get you farther than going, hey, this person makes less, more than me, and I am nicer than they are, better than they are, whatever. That's just not going to be as effective in most cases.
and potentially burden your relationship, right? Your working relationship with your
Mhm.
manager if you start in a negative kind of way.
Right.
I can ask you
Yeah.
questions
No
all
whining. No whining.
the
Whine to
exactly.
your friends. Don't whine to your boss.
Exactly. Kate, for those of us or for those guests that are joining us today and may have more specific questions about their situation, what's the best way for people to find you?
Well, I'm going to share my screen again because I actually have something that you can see. Share. Um, so the slide that I have is taken from my Pay Up workshop. It's an online workshop that you can get. But my website is katedixon.org. And my email info@katedixon.org. And this is what my book looks like, my Unlocking Insider Secrets of Salary Negotiation. And it's available basically anywhere that you can buy books. So of course, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, um, Powell's, Apple Play, Google Play, all of those kinds of places will have it.
Excellent. Kate, thank you so much for the great, great advice. I love it. And I wish you the best. I know that your speaking engagements are here and everywhere else. So I wish you the best of luck and thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who was able to join us for this 10 minutes with 52.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye all.